Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comicsly Podcast, the official podcast of Comicsly.com. Thank you for joining us today. You are listening to episode number 30. On this episode, Angela and I are going to be discussing the 2021 animated documentary Flee. Flee is a movie about a young man and his family trying to leave Afghanistan, and specifically the city of Kabul, as the Soviet Union is pulling out of Afghanistan at the end of the Soviet-Afghan War. This conversation, Angela had watched this movie for extra credit in one of her classes, and similar to In the Mood for Love, suggested that we do an episode about it. So we recorded this, I think, about a year ago or so, and I haven't gotten around to getting episodes out. We've been a little inconsistent in that, but things are developing, and that will start changing in the coming weeks and months. But this is an episode that was recorded a bit ago, but is sadly kind of very relevant again in the wake of the U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan about 2 years, 18 months ago. We obviously didn't have that context, or we didn't bring that up during the episode, but there are some similarities in terms of what happens to a state, a city, a family, a community when international powers that had been propagating a war on the other side of the world, when they leave, right? What is left in the aftermath, and how do people pick up the pieces and move on and develop in all sorts of ways, right? In all the ways that a life develops over time. And so it's a really beautiful look at one man and his family trying to do that in the wake of this very horrendous event that happened. This movie's set in the early parts, that main story set in the late 80s. So not an easy movie to watch, despite the lightness of certain parts of it, but I think really a really important, really relevant movie. And we watched it on Hulu. I don't know if it's still on Hulu, but you can check, and if not, I'm sure you can find it on like Apple TV or Amazon or things like that. But yeah, so we're going to be discussing Flee. Just content warning, and we give a content warning in the episode itself, but there is a scene that we discussed that has the suggestion or implication of sexual violence, and specifically rape. So just heads up, and we will give that warning in the episode as well. With all of that said, hope you enjoy our conversation about the movie Flee.
It didn't win anything at the Oscars, I checked.
Was it up for Best Doc?
For Best Documentary, Best Animated thing, I think, and something else. Best International something.
Best International was tough because
Best Documentary.
Drive My Car was supposed to be good. I didn't see Summer of Soul, which won Best Documentary. And then, what won Best Animated Movie this year?
I think it was Encanto.
Oh, that makes sense. That's a tough year for it then.
Yeah, it would have been cool if it won, because then it would have been even more like, oh, and we're talking about it because it was on the Oscars.
Is that why your teacher assigned it as extra credit because it's timely, or like did they genuinely?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
No, there was like a thing. There was a thing happening where it was like open to UW students, and we got free access to it. Was it just on Hulu for you?
Yeah, it's just on Hulu.
Well, I watched it through Vimeo.
Vimeo?
Is that how you pronounce it?
Vimeo, yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Because that's not how I pronounce it. So I don't think that's...
I'm going to continue to say Vimeo, and you can continue to say Vimeo?
Vimeo.
Well.
But basically, it was called... The program was called The Afghan Refugee Experience in Wisconsin and Beyond. And it was like an event, and there was like, you had like 2 days to screen it, and then there was like a Zoom call, and I don't remember like what happened in the Zoom call because I did not go.
Was that part of the extra credit, or just... Pardon?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. So it's because that was happening. It wasn't really because of like the film.
Oh, okay. Okay. Was it? Yeah. Do you know who was on? Like, was the director on that call, or?
You know what? I'm not sure, and I kind of don't want to know because, like, what if it was like really good and I just missed out, and I don't think I can handle that. Mm. Let me look though. Let me try to find the email.
Okay. Well, while Ange does that, I can set up the movie a little bit. So, Flee, again, 2021 documentary. I think it came out at the beginning of last year. I think it debuted. I was reading a little bit of background. I think it debuted at not Sundance, Cannes. I'm forgetting if it was Sundance or Cannes, but one of the big film festivals. I think it's Sundance, because Sundance is in January, and it won Best Documentary there. But yeah, like we were saying, was up for some awards at the Oscars, but didn't win. But the thing that the story is of a Afghan man who lives in Kabul with his family I think the film starts, I think it puts a year at the beginning. I think the year is 1984. I think the year comes up at the beginning somehow. He's listening to Take On Me. He's like running through the streets of Kabul, listening to Take On Me, which is a great song. And
it's kind of funny because have you seen the Take On Me music video?
No, I haven't. Is it kind of like...
It's animated like that.
Oh,
not like
is
exactly
it?
like that, but it was very reminiscent of like, because it's like, this story is like this guy and he goes into this comic book world and he's singing Take On Me.
Oh,
how have you
wow.
not seen it?
I get like... I don't listen to a lot of, or I don't like make it a point to see a lot of music videos generally. So I'll definitely have to look at that though. Yeah, because I love that song. I don't know. I've never thought about it, but I guess it makes sense. It was a big song. It would have like a music video. I don't know. Most music video from the 80s are like, I always think of the music video, which isn't really a music video so much as it is just shots of like the people singing. But the one for, I forget if it was like Live Aid or whatever, but when they're singing the Christmas song, what's it? What's the one like there won't be snow in Africa this Christmas? I forget the name of that song, but they got all those.
Is it like Do You Know It's Christmas Time?
Do You Know It's Christmas Time? Yeah, I always think of like that.
Do you know it's Christmas?
That's what I think of when I think of like an 80s music video, which probably, I should watch some other ones. But yeah, so I think it starts in 84 and then it sort of talks about what's going on in the country, which was a civil war that in the early and mid 80s took place outside of the cities and was fought more in the countryside and more rural parts of the country. But it was a civil war between the Mujahideen, who were rebel fighters backed by, I was looking around and like it said like 25% of like their like the money or the cost of their war was supported by the US, right? But backed by the US, China, a couple other countries that were against the Soviet Union. And then, so the civil war was between the Mujahideen and the like government, the established government of Afghanistan that was being supported by the Soviet Union and had been for like a decade, I think since 79. And this is some history. Did you know this history? Like, this is some stuff I actually didn't like. I kind of knew, but didn't. I think this movie lays it out really well. What happens specifically, that the US was sort of funding this and the other countries funding this as a proxy war. And there's even a news commentator who says it at a time, right? The US was kind of hoping that this would be like the way that Vietnam was for them, that this would be like a Vietnam for the Soviet Union, right? And that they put all this money and effort into like controlling or putting their stake in a country and its government, but then they end up like losing and having to retreat, right? But then before it cuts away, the news person says somewhat ominously, like, this could turn, right? And it could become another Vietnam for the US, which isn't exactly what happens, but it definitely sets the stage for what happened later in the 90s and then in the early 2000s. But yeah, so it does a pretty good job if you don't know that history of what was going on in Afghanistan in the mid to late 80s and how the sort of Cold War, which was still going on at that point, was playing out in that part of the world between the US and the Soviet Union. It does a good job of laying that out, right? And then just getting into the story of how does that affect a single person and a family. So then the rest of the movie, we get the tale of Amin, who had to escape after the Soviet Union pulled out because the country fell into civil war, and everything he and his family had to go to get out of there and get to Europe, get to safety.
And like in current day, he's like on Wikipedia, it's like he's like preparing to like marry his fiance and like they're looking for a house.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so it's cutting back and forth between current day when he's telling this story to the person who's making the documentary, and these his memories, which are all animated, right? There's a little bit of like actual footage, some news footage and camera footage and things, but it's mostly an animated movie, as we were saying, right? It was nominated in the animation category at the Oscars. So that's kind of the like very unique thing about this movie. And did you know why it was? I had to kind of look this up because I like wasn't exactly sure until I looked it up, like why this was animated and why it wasn't.
Because of like anonymity.
Yeah. So I guess something that we'll talk about, right? But his entry into Europe, his gaining citizenship into Denmark eventually, is sort of he has to tell this really intense lie in order to do that, right? And his anonymity needs to be protected right now, even like 2 decades later, because if the government figured out that like he had lied to get that, then I guess it could complicate his citizenship and he could potentially be not a Danish citizen anymore, which is but it's like really messed up that is still something he has to live with. Yeah, I don't know. So where do you want to start with this, Ange? Or I don't know. What did you end up? So you said you wrote something for extra credit. What did you?
Oh, it wasn't good. No.
Well, what did you write about?
Let's not get twisted here.
But what did you choose to write about?
2 sentences.
You had to write 2 sentences.
No, I had to listen.
The bar is
she's a
pretty
PhD
low.
candidate. She's not. Her heart's not really in this class, and I'm okay with that.
That's a pretty low bar though for extra credit, regardless.
It was like, watch this. Let me find the assignment. I found the Zoom was just like it was the director. So it was on behalf of the film club, and it was the director of the Immigrant Justice Clinic at UW-Madison, and she was there. I've never heard of that before, so I don't really know what that was. So we had to write the main theme or takeaway message, what worked as a storytelling technique, and how did the themes of film resonate with you regarding the themes of this course? This can be very broad, is what she put in parentheses. So, and I wrote, so for like how it resonated with the course, we were talking about like mobility and like how some people are like, if you're like a businessman, you can like put a little extra money for like TSA pre-check and like you can like pretty much go anywhere really easily. But if you're like, a refugee trying to get out of a country into a different one or something like that, it's like totally different experience.
Yeah. That's
really all I took away from the class. So I can't speak any more to that, but I just thought that was like a powerful way of showing that. I also mentioned the scene where the tourists were taking photos of the refugees on the boat. And I was like, I thought that scene was really powerful because like in our case, like not like specifically, but like that's like if we were anywhere in that film, that's where we would be sort of like on that cruise or whatever, not really doing anything. That's what I wrote. Yeah. And I got 4 out of 4 points. Yeah. So.
I mean, as soon as you said mobility, do you want to set up that scene a little bit? And as soon as you said mobility, that's the thing that came to mind for me. Like that scene it's hard to watch, but it's kind of incredible. Like what's going on in that one?
So I think it's like the first time that they tried to get out of, I think they were in Russia at the time, but they were trying to go to Sweden.
So they got from Kabul to Russia. They're trying to get to...
But like Russia, and like in Russia, it wasn't good living conditions. So they were trying to get out. It was him, his brother, and his mom.
And his 2 sisters.
And he was with his 2 sisters had already gone ahead somewhere else.
They went from Kabul to Russia, and then they were able to send the 2 sisters who got to Sweden, I think.
Right. But so then they're trying to join the 2 sisters. But basically, so they're with like this group of people on this boat that's like, first like the smugglers like shoved them into like the bottom of the boat, really cramped. And then like the boat kind of started to like fill with water, so they got out of like the bottom and were like throwing water out of the side, and it was like looking pretty dicey. And then they were kind of just like I don't know, like the boat didn't work, or like there was no way to like call for help.
Yeah, I think
so they were kind of just like out.
Engine had stopped, right? Because they're in they kind of, when they're trapped down there, they kind of hear. That's actually like it's dark, right? And I think someone has like a flashlight, right? So you're just seeing like people's faces and hearing engine and water. And I think the engine stops, it starts to fill up with water, and then they have to start bailing it out. But I don't think they're actually going anywhere at that point.
Yeah, but then so they're like out on the water, and then this big like cruise, I think it's a cruise ship, comes through, and like everyone in the small boat, it's like really like excited and happy, and like they're all like kind of like celebrating because I think they're gonna be saved, and those people are like definitely gonna help them, right? And,
it's a Norwegian cruise ship, right? So it's like a European country that they think will help them. Yeah.
And at the same time, Amin, that's like the name that he goes under, he's kind of narrated it, saying how like, I think it was like, I don't know if it was like disgust or the right word, but like how he was sort of watching like his like fellow refugees sort of see this boat and like see like how they felt like they were going to be saved, and looking back how like sad it was, and how I don't know if he said he was like ashamed of it or something, but like it was like some like negative kind of angry type feeling. And then you can see that like as the boat gets closer, the boat stops and people are getting really, or the cruise ship gets closer and it stops, and then the people on the boat are getting really excited about it, and then you just see like flashing coming from the cruise ship, and then you can see that like people on the cruise ship have like come to the deck and are looking and like taking pictures, and then like they're doing that for a while, and then like one by one they just like leave, and like people on the boat are like, what's going on? And then the cruise ship, like on their speakers, are like, someone's gonna like be called the National Coast Guard or whatever, they're gonna help you, and then they went away.
I think it's the Estonian Coast Guard, right? So an Easter, like a I don't know if Estonia was a part of the USSR, but not a country that is going to like want them or like help them. It's going to be a similar like situation to where they were in Russia, where they're in like bad cramped living conditions. They have to be afraid of the police because they don't have like proper papers, right? They're very much in this like in between space where they're not going to like immediately send them back to Afghanistan, but like they also don't want them there and will take advantage of them. Yeah, it's like that boat scene is hard, right? Because you have these like groups of people in this place, right? Not separated in like any physical sense really, or you know, in terms of like where they are in the world, but like I think that's kind of what he's getting at a little bit. I think you're right. It's not like I forget exactly what he said, if it's like embarrassed. I think it's something kind of like embarrassed, right? That they had to be in this position where they're at the mercy of these other people who like haven't, you know, it's not necessarily their fault, but like they, you know, like can't necessarily do anything about it, right? But they are the people in a position to help, and they're like unwilling, right? I don't know who makes the call on that boat about like, are you going to help or are you not going to help? But like if you're a passenger on that cruise ship, right, you're like kind of helpless to do anything, maybe. I don't know, but it like, I don't know, it was weird to like watch, to see them on those like opposite sides, right? Very much of like a kind of like a mirror, sort of like a looking glass moment, right? Where you can like see something that's so close, but it's like also still incredibly far away. And I think that's like so many moments in this movie, right? Like something is there, and he like, you know, whether it's like it I guess the thing he's trying to get is freedom, right? He's trying to get to like safety, to be with his family, and constantly getting like close and close, and like still is kind of so far away. And even kind of when he at the end, where when you do see these flash forwards to the present day, right, like he is really struggling to find home, right? The movie opens with, or the documentary opens with him talking about like home is being a place that you can always go and it's not temporary, right? And like even though he is in a place where he's like physically safe, like that is still something that is eluding him, right? All these years later, because of the kind of lie that he has to live, or the false truth that he has to continue to like prop up. The boat scene stood out. Was there anything else that stood out to you? Any other moments that were like, you thought like, were they like represented what was going on in the story that he was telling really well?
I don't know. I thought it was like interesting how they were using sort of like between the animation, sort of like real footage, especially when like explaining what was going on in the news. I thought that was like pretty good, pretty powerful. Also, this doesn't have to do with what was like going on in like Afghanistan, but the scene where he like tells his family that he's gay, and then his brother like takes him to like a club. I just thought that was nice.
Yeah. I was really worried about what was going to happen in that scene.
Me too.
I thought I was like,
oh no.
yeah. So another, right, kind of continuing on this thing where he doesn't, sort of struggling to find freedom, right, both in a physical sense, but also in a, more like personal sense, right? Freedom to be himself knows from a very young age, right? So this is something he talks about even when he was back in Kabul, that he knew he was attracted to men, right? He knew he was gay, and he talks about how like they didn't exactly have a word for that. He says at one point he can't read Dari, but I don't know if that's the language that they speak. That's the written language, he says, is Dari, but they don't have a word for homosexual. And so, right, it's very much something he has to hide, even though there's all of these sort of like moments during the movie where you see like glances of, he's like watching Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, or he like, sees a person on the street, and feels like a attraction to them, right? And he can't share that with anyone else. And even when he gets to Europe, right, he talks about like some bad boyfriends that he had who sort of struggled, who held like his secret about his family, that they were still alive and that they weren't dead, like held that over him. And so his homosexuality always felt like very conditional and not something that he could necessarily share with other people. But did you have any thoughts about where his brother was taking him in that moment? I wasn't
sure, because like were you, if you're not, so let's say that like he's not down with it,
yeah,
where are you gonna take him?
I thought he was gonna take him to a prostitute, like a female prostitute.
Okay,
that's
yeah,
what
that
I thought was potential.
mind.
He was like, no, you're wrong, like you've never had sex and you don't know what you want. I was like, oh boy.
Actually, yeah, I forgot, because like they had first asked him like, oh, have you ever?
Yeah,
actually, actually
no, it ends up really nice, actually, right? His uncle takes him to a gay club are they in Denmark or are they in Sweden at that point? I'm not sure.
I don't remember.
In one of those countries, and he's like talks about how they don't see it, right? I think it cuts away. He like goes to the bar and like asks for a drink, and then it kind of just like cuts away. But a moment where he feels surrounded by people who, even though he has no idea about them and they have no idea about him, and they're from different parts of the world, like it feels a certain sense of safety there, at least for that moment. Yeah, absolutely. That was a really nice one. What did you, so we've been talking a little about how the animation, right? So like, the Norwegian, the scene on the boat, the scene going into the gay club, him running through the streets of Kabul in that opening scene. What did you think about like the animation as a storytelling tool, or did you have any points where you felt like it really was helping it, or like kind of was working against it? What were your feelings on that overall?
I didn't like. I kind of like animations. Like, I thought it was cool. I think that at some points it was sort of hard to tell exactly what was going on. Like the time, like when Amin went over, because like him and like the person that he was interviewing with, they were like high school friends, and at one point I think he like gets into like a fight with his fiance and goes over to like the person who's interviewing, like his house.
Mm-hmm.
And like I wasn't sure like where in the timeline that was happening.
Yeah,
just sort of like I had some trouble like fitting it in there, but that was basically it.
Yeah, I think the early parts of the movie, when they're cutting back between the present day and the like the past, you're not exactly sure where you are, or right, he looks different as like a kid or a teenager than he does as an adult. He has like facial hair, right? He has, it's sort of darker around his cheeks and his mouth, indicating that he's supposed to have like a beard or facial hair or something. But I think there's a couple points, especially early on in the movie, when it's going back and forth between those two timelines pretty quickly and without really like setting up, because I don't think at that point you understand the relationship between the documentary, like the director, who's his friend, Jonas Por Rasmussen, who met Amin when he was a teenager, and so was like a friend of him and knew his story and like wanted to share it, but again, like did it in this way that would preserve his anonymity. Did you, so this is something that's like been on my mind a little bit, just because I recently finished listening to this podcast called the Trojan horse affair, which is about it's about this incident in England where there was a letter sent to a school board that told them that there was this Muslim plot to sort of Islamify schools in a certain part of the country. And then it had all of these ramifications for how schools were run and how their England's national security laws were. And it's a really interesting podcast because the podcast started as a senior thesis product for someone going to journalism school, right? So someone who's not a professional journalism was who is Muslim, right? Wanted to figure out who wrote this letter because in the whole setup of the thing, they never actually figured out who wrote the letter, even though it had all of these far-reaching effects inside of the country. And so that's kind of when he pitches this project to his whoever's overseeing his thesis, he's like, this is the thing I want to figure out, right? I'm gonna spend time, right? I'm a journalist, I'm gonna spend time figuring out who did this. And it kind of blows up and becomes this big thing. And he did a podcast it ends up being a podcast with the people who make Serial and This American Life, so it becomes this sort of big thing. But one of the themes throughout the podcast is he really struggles with this idea that journalists are supposed to be objective, right? And they're these people who just look at all the facts, and then they are able to just zero in on, oh, this is exactly what the facts are telling me. And I think that same thing can happen with documentaries, right? Where we have this idea that the person and the camera are supposed to be objective, right? They're just looking at what is happening, right? And not putting their own not putting their own thumb on the scale and sort of they're not interpreting for us, right? They're giving us all the information and then we can get to the conclusion ourselves, right? They're not kind of putting their bias into what they're making. And something that I was thinking about a little bit with the animation, just because that was on my mind, it was well, this kind of maybe removes that idea, right? Because when you decide to animate something, you have to decide what does it look like, right? Because you can't use, again, this more objective means where you're just using footage of what did Kabul look like in 1984, right? Or what did it look like to live in those apartments in Russia in the early 90s, right? You don't have you have some news footage and they use that to sort of ground you, right? But was he actually listening to Take on Me while running through the streets of Kabul? Maybe, but maybe not, right? But it doesn't really matter because it tells us who this person is and what type of person it is. And we don't have to worry, right? We're not supposed to worry about whether or not that happened, right? We get the impression that he's a happy-go-lucky kid and he likes to wear his sister's nightgown, right? It's much more about the feeling and the emotion of the thing than then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And so I don't know, I think the animation for me sort of let me sink into the story and the emotion of it, because it's super emotional, right? There's he has to leave his sisters, right? But at the end of the story, he has to leave his mom, right? When he makes his final escape, they can only get enough money together to send one person, right? And so his brother is me and mom are going to stay here and you're going to go and do this by yourself, right? And so I don't know, I don't know, I want to hear what you think, but I was never worried about did this actually happen exactly this way, right? Because we're already seeing an interpretation of it with the way that's animated. So it kind of just took down that barrier or that worry for me a little bit. I don't know, did you have any thoughts like that, or did it help you get into it a little bit more?
Yeah, I think it kind of made it more maybe just because it was different, a different type of documentary.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely think the animation made it feel more like a narrative and less than a report.
Yeah.
Or less objective. And I think I do agree that I think it's better to get the point across in this case rather than oh, we can't put Take on Me because that's not the song he was listening to in this case. Yeah.
And there was a moment when I caught myself, because there's a scene when he's in Russia. He talks about how they're getting very bored, so he goes out and he wanders past a McDonald's, right? And supposedly it's because it was a big deal, right? The first McDonald's to open in Russia, right after the fall of the Soviet Union, right? And there was a point when I was I thought to myself, was he actually there for that moment? And maybe he was, but maybe he wasn't. It doesn't really matter, right? It's more of he was in Russia at a time when communism was, or the Soviet Union and that version of communism was falling and the country was changing, and what did those changes look like, right? And like it's this it's Western capitalism, right? It's McDonald's and like, I don't know, Burger King if they were around or whatever, right? But like he was there at that moment in the country, whether or not he walked past that McDonald's on that day. And I had to kind of like catch myself and even be like, no, that's not the point of it, right? Because that scene's actually really horrific. If you're gonna watch this movie, content warning, there's like violence, and there's a scene of, they don't show it, but it like implied sexual violence that happens to a young woman. So, and that is sort of tied, that it happens during the McDonald's scene. But yeah, it's not not that the facts don't matter, right? Because I think you're right. You're saying you can focus on the story. And like, I think the nice thing about the news footage, and I think they put it in and like I think they choose their moments to use it very well, is just to like, in case you didn't believe this person, right? Like, why would they lie? But if you didn't believe them, right? They choose to drop in this news footage at pretty critical moments. I think like his sisters, when they make their escape, they get locked in a cargo container on a container ship that's going from Russia to Sweden. And that's a moment they choose to drop in news footage, right? When, I don't know if it was specifically that cargo container, but a cargo container full of refugees was discovered on a container ship that docked in Sweden, and discusses like the people, the condition of the people that were inside and where they came from, right? So chooses its moments very well to like ground it in these specific details that it's working around. And the McDonald's scene is another one. It cuts to some news footage of a McDonald's like ribbon cutting ceremony. Again, doesn't really matter whether or not he was there, but that's the moment in that country. Yeah. I don't know. Any more thoughts on that, or?
No.
Did you like the animation, like the style of it? Not thinking about like its effect, but just like the style of it.
It was like kind of weird, but like I didn't dislike it.
Yeah. So I think it's, I think it's like, I don't know exactly the way to describe it, but like there's not a lot of like frames. Like you can sort of see it switching from like one animated panel to the next, right? There's not like all of the moments in between. It's like a little bit jerky. Did you kind of...
Or like choppy, kind of? Yeah.
And yeah, so like, most movies are filmed at like 24 frames per second, right? So there's sort of like 24 pictures in 1 second. And this, I would say, was maybe at like half of that, right? So you see every frame for a little bit longer, because it was like this very choppy animation style, which like...
Yeah, I think that like it kind of made it feel more like something that was like made, because I think maybe if it was more like seamless, it would just feel too produced. And I think that the way that it was, I think made it like seem less like that.
Yeah. Do you think if it tried to be some sort of like hyper realistic animation style, do you think that would have like maybe worked against it a little bit, going back to that, like, if they had to animate it to keep it anonymous, fine, but then like, we're gonna make it hyper realistic to like represent what was actually going on? Like, do you think that would have worked against it, or do you think that would have been better?
I don't think it would have been better, because I think I like how it is. I don't know, a funny thought just came to me, where it's like, when you're like, what if they did it in like a different style? And I was like, what if they did it in like an anime style? Like, no, they shouldn't do that. Or like a Pixar style. No, because like at that point, what's stopping, if they're gonna make it all hyper realistic, then like, how is that any different than like getting like actors or something like that?
Yeah.
I think that I like sort of, it's a little bit ambiguous.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, I guess that could have been another option, right? Because that's something that some documentaries do. The ones where they like recreate the scene with like actors and...
Yeah, but like that always, even I'm kind of just like, when like things are like reenacted.
Yeah.
I'm always aware that it's being reenacted.
Yeah.
So I feel like this was like, I wasn't thinking about how something was being reenacted when I was watching this.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Yeah. Because then you're like, it's bringing in another thing that you're like worried about, like, oh, did they reenact it correctly, right? Or like, did they do his story or like the historical time period like justice? Yeah. One thing, and I don't know if you agree with this, but like something I thought, I don't know, I was looking up a couple things about the or like the director talked a little bit about the animation, and we'll talk for a second about there's sort of two animation styles in here, and one only comes up in certain points, but the sort of choppy one that we've been talking about, again, I don't know if this was on purpose, but like, and this might be reading a little bit too much into it, but like the sort of choppiness of it, you know, could have been like, it's just cheaper, right? If you have to like literally animate less frames, then that's cheaper. But it could like, I wonder if it was intentional in that like the animation was sort of like incomplete a little bit, right? That if you had like animated more scenes or animated more frames, it would have been smoother. But like memories are also a little bit incomplete, right? Like you don't remember every single second, right? You have like this broad outline of what happened, right? And so the animation is just like, it's showing you enough, right? It's descriptive and specific enough to, again, like show you what happened and communicate the emotion of the scene, right? Coupled with his like narration without, again, being like hyper realistic, trying to get like, be like, this is the facts or something. So like, I don't know if they were trying to like invoke how memories work a little bit with that, but that's kind of what it brought up for me a little bit.
Ooh.
That incompleteness of the anime, like that choppiness. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the other animation style, and this is like, it's not like anime, but it's like a little bit more anime, right? With the other style that they use is sort of this, it's like sketchy black and white animation. It kind of looks like if you were drawing with like thick black charcoal on like newsprint, and again, it's like it's just like scenes sort of flashing, right? You can see one scene sort of flash to the next, and how the lines sort of morph, right? And so the focus in this animation style, again, why I kind of like say like it's a little bit closer to anime maybe, is because it's all on like form and like movement and color, right? With those like big bold lines. And I was looking up the director interviewed, right? This only sort of comes up in moments of intense like fear or emotion, right? And I didn't notice this so much, but he said when he was like listening back to the voice recordings, right, to the interviews, right, he couldn't hear Amin's voice change when he was talking about something like that, right? Which makes sense. Your voice change when you're talking about something like emotional or stressful. And so he wanted to change the animation style in those moments to sort of emphasize, I don't know, did you hear like a big change in his voice at those points? I didn't.
I feel like once maybe, but like
Okay.
I don't remember enough to say like when.
Yeah. I don't remember like feeling like again, maybe it's the thing that it's something that you hear if you're just listening to it, but then when you have the visual, right, you're focusing, okay, something else is going on now, that there's this huge visual shift. But yeah, what did you think about those scenes? Or did you think the shift in animation was effective in communicating like a different type of thing is happening in those moments?
Yeah.
I
don't remember them too much, but like, yeah. I think if I were to rewatch them, I would definitely think that.
Yeah. Well, I think the movie starts, I forget if it starts like that. Does it start with him running through the streets of Kabul, or does it start with the people running in that sort of other animation style?
I don't know.
I forget. I think it might start with that other animation style, because I think it's actually talking about the invasion of Kabul, and then I think it flashes back to like years earlier. So yeah, I think that's the first thing we see, and it's just these people running. And I think he might be talking about his dad at that moment. Because do we see his dad, or has his dad already been? Because his dad gets taken away when the Mujahideen take over. Oh, we see that moment, right? Because they come to the door and the dad leaves the watch, and then eventually the policeman takes the watch. Yeah, we do. Okay, so but I think it starts with that sort of black and white sketchy animation style, and then we flash back. But I'm not 100% sure. Any other points? Anything you want to mention before we wrap up, Inge? No.
I guess because like I don't know, it's like what's happening like Afghanistan, like refugees and like all of that like sort of conversation about it. I feel like it's so like it's almost like too easy for like people to like get involved, because it's like, oh, like it helped, because like I guess for me personally it helped me like understand like it on like an individual level more versus like seeing something on the news, or like seeing like some like picture of like some kid like all alone somewhere. And I guess first and before, like it's sometimes when it's just like news stories or like things like that, it's like almost like too easy to like see that and be like, oh yeah, that's based on that, like, that's my entire understanding of that's, like, enough.
Yeah.
But I think that seeing that and, like, seeing the whole journey and, like, especially how they were, like, they, like, tried to leave once and that was, like, so much money and they didn't even, like, get to where they were trying to go. And, like, that's just, like, stuff that you don't really, like, think about or see from just, like, a New York Times, whatever.
Yeah. I think there's even, like, a little bit of an indictment of the news. I don't know if you picked up on this, but it's early in the movie when they're talking. It's about the moment when the Soviet Union pulls out, so they're not going to back the Afghan government, and the Mujahideen are going to move in and start taking over the country. And so they're going to invade Kabul, right? The moment when they have to get out. And you see some news, and I don't know who the news anchor is, but it's some American news anchor. And let me see if I wrote down his specific wording, because it's really, I mean, the word that came to mind for me is disgusting how he talked about it. What did he say? He says when right, with the Soviets gone and the U.S. pulling out of their embassy, right, I didn't write down his exact wording, but something about how they're going to, like, turn on themselves or, I forget his exact phrasing, but it's really gross that, like, this is, and I think this is so much of the stereotyping about this part of the world is that about people from this part of the world, about, like, that's just what happens there, right? That, you know, that's a stereotype about Muslims and people who are from that part of the world and who follow the religion of Islam, is like that's sort of part of their person, right? They're like preconditioned to fight or something, or to, like, be violent. And you hear it in I forget his turn of phrase in that broadcast, but it's like, it's so gross about how, like, this is, they're fighting, and the fact that they're going to engage in a civil war is, like, somehow inevitable, and it makes them lesser, and it totally ignores the fact that, like, these conditions were set up by countries on other parts of the world, right? That, like, this did not happen in a vacuum. This was not destined. This was not always going to happen, right? This was calculated and created by people manipulating forces inside of that country. And I think, right, the news often, it ignores that. And then you're absolutely right, it ignores, like, what's actually happening to real people, right? And then in all of the complexities of, like, what is going to happen to this person now because of decisions made hundreds of thousands of miles away, right? The news is, like, not interested in that. Like, they're interested in maintaining a status quo, and, like, this movie is trying to get you to see past that. And, like, I don't know, but you notice that moment too. Yeah.
I'm just like, just another dumb white person.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like I don't know, like, it's some, like, famous story. It's on, like, one of the major channels, one of whoever the white guy that would have been telling the news on, like, ABC or NBC or CBS back in the late 80s. It was them. Because I was like, I've seen that person before, but I don't know them by name, but yeah. Yeah. So that's Flea 2021 documentary, and it's on Hulu, right? So if you have Hulu, or if you know where to get it on the internet, it's on those places as well. Also, although I did have a little bit of trouble, not that I did this, but theoretically I would have had a little bit of trouble finding it on the internet. You can, but it's not in the theoretical usual. It's not in the usual places, if that's what you're potentially.
Branch out a little.
I did. It's there. If you branch
Maybe
out,
go to page 2 on the Google page.
Absolutely. All right, so that will take us to our next segment of the show. We'll be back after this short break. Back with this week's one shots. Angela, are you ready to go? I didn't give you any warning. You ready to go, or
good.
You're good. Okay, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I'm good. Okay, so I read a lot over spring break because I don't let myself read during the school year because I get too fixated on books and then I don't do anything else. So I read a couple books and I really liked. I finally read The Secret History. It's like I've seen it recommended a lot, so I feel like proud of myself that I actually got around to reading it. Have you heard of it? It's by Donna Tartt.
I feel like I recognize that name.
She wrote The Goldfinch or Goldfinch. Yeah.
That movie that we kind of liked and most people hated, but
I don't remember it at all.
oh, I remember that movie. I remember not hating it and then going online and looking at reviews and be like, oh, people hated this movie. And I was like, it wasn't that bad. But anyways,
I don't remember that at all. Secret History is like, it's sort of like if you're into like dark academia, like, you know, that aesthetic, which I think that is like, I don't know.
Like
I have
magic?
some issues with dark academia aesthetic. No, it's like, you're not on TikTok, so like, you don't get it. But, and like, it's like the dark academia aesthetic is like, oh, like romanticizing like going to like some like private college in like East Coast or like London, and like old libraries and like, I don't know, cigarettes and, you know, just like we're really romanticizing.
That's just real life. That's just people like wanting to go to an Ivy League school.
Yeah, and like truthfully, is the dark academia aesthetic a little bit not so great because it sort of is like it gets a little bit like elitist because it's just like, oh yeah, like go to a good college where like these fancy like old money type kind of vibes.
Got it.
But that's another thing. And it's sort of like this book has sort of been credited as like it's like the pinnacle like piece of like literature, I guess. Like if you like dark academia, you probably either read or know this book because it's about these 6 students who go to this college, and they're all like intellectuals. They're all like really smart. All of them except one come from money. And it's on Wikipedia, it says it's an inverted detective story because basically these smart kids thought they were so smart they could get away with murder. And do they? I don't know. You'll have to read the book to find out. But yeah. The end. That's what I liked.
And you liked it. It was good.
I liked it because it was like, when I read, I go through like phases of genres. So like over winter break, I was in like fantasy phase, and then like afterwards, I was in like real trashy rom-com phase, and like I was sort of like dipping into like mystery detective murder phase, and I thought that was a really good kind of dive in. So yeah, I'd recommend it.
Okay. That's The Secret History by Donna Tartt, Dark Academia. That sounds interesting, actually. Like, I don't know if I'm going to read it, but So it's not, it's fiction.
I'd say let's go see it.
So it's fiction, but it's not.
Yes.
Like, there's not like magic, right? It's like the real world.
No, there's nothing. I don't know why you keep thinking there's magic. There's
I don't know.
magic.
When you say like dark academia, I don't know. I think, you know what I think of? Have you ever seen The Magicians?
No.
It's like so moody. It's like Harry Potter, but it's like moody and emo and goth. And not, the magic is also like very weird, but I don't know. It's like they go to, there's like this elite magic school on the East Coast, but like everyone's super like emo and goth and like in their feelings all the time. I mean, I don't know why that's what
kind of like
comes into my head. But.
I mean, you're kind of spot on. Here, I'm sending you like when you look up dark academia and you go to the Google thing, just quick look. Like it's like what's that one called? Seize the Day movie.
Dead Poet Society?
It's like Dead Poet Society, but darker, but like more like dramatic.
Okay.
Did you see what I texted you?
No, I didn't. What we got?
And a lot of it's like fashion, like how to dress like a dark academia aesthetic, how to make your apartment look all dark academia.
Okay. There's it's lot of
kind of romanticizing, like the lifestyle.
Okay. There's a lot of like tweed and heavy cotton and, got it. Okay. All right, my one shot for this week is the thing that I mentioned, the podcast that I mentioned during the earlier part of the show, the Trojan Horse affair. It is by the same people who made Serial, all 3 seasons of Serial. Sarah Koenig, the host of those first 3 seasons, is not in it, but her and Ira Glass worked on the editing, so it's that same team, and it's the host is, there's 2 hosts. It's Hamza Syed, who sort of he starts it, right? He's the guy who is working on his senior thesis at a journalism school, and he's like, I'm gonna figure out who wrote this letter that has sort of had these huge outsized effects on British national security and educational policy. And so he gets in touch with Brian Reed, who is a podcaster who has worked a lot on This American Life, but he also did the podcast S-Town probably like 5 or 6 years ago now. And it's their journey to try to figure out who wrote this letter and why. And again, it has this, it's interesting because it's Hamza and Brian going back and forth, and Brian is this very, he's like a pretty classical journalist, right? Like, he has an interview style and he's like not very confrontational, right? And he's like focused in like sort of doing things, getting the results the way he's always gotten results, right? And it's worked for him a lot, right? He's like produced a lot of really good stories that way. And Hamza's not into doing things that way, right? And he doesn't, as someone who's new to this field, right, he isn't tied down by those sort of structural elements of journalism. And so hearing how that plays out in how the story goes, right, how they report the story, but also then them talking about that, right, and how they approach doing the job of journalism is really fascinating. And I think there's a version of the story that is like pretty straightforward, right? You've like heard it before, right? It's an interesting question, right? It's going to be produced really well. The music and the sort of way that the audio is mixed with the reporting is going to be great, but this just has something extra, right? Because of Hamza, right? Because of the personality and the perspective he brings to it. And yeah, I don't know. I really think people should check it out. I think it's a little bit different than the stuff that has been on, than you hear on This American Life every week, or that, than something you heard on like Serial season 1 and season 2. So if you're looking for kind of a new podcast, it's 8 episodes and it goes all over the world. So like the narrative, like they tell a good story, right? These are people who know how to tell a good story, right? So that's always there. So if you're looking for a podcast, the Trojan Horse Affair is a good one that I would recommend.
And it's nothing like this podcast.
And it's nothing
Probably
like this podcast.
Listen.
No.
So if you hate this podcast and you want like the exact opposite.
Well, I wouldn't say it's the exact opposite. They have a pretty good back and forth, right? We have a pretty good back and forth. There's some overlap.
Well, like, you can go to them for like worldly intellectual stuff, and then you can come to us for like a break.
We're a little bit intellectual.
Yeah, but it's nothing to write a thesis about.
No, it's nothing to write a thesis about. Absolutely not. All right, so that is going to take us to the end of the show. And so I want to thank everyone for listening to another episode of the Comicsly Podcast. You can follow Angela on Goodreads by searching Angela Glowacki. You can follow me on Twitter by searching @Joey Glowacki. That's JoeyGlowacky. Please rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your preferred podcast listening app. All reviews are greatly appreciated and help our show grow. You can also get in touch with us via email by sending your feedback or questions to podcast@comicsly.com. There is a link in the show notes. You can also listen and give a thumbs up to episodes of the show on the Comicsly YouTube channel. You can find our channel by searching Comicsly on YouTube or following the link in the show notes. There you can also find past streams from our Twitch channel along with other great videos. The music you heard in this episode is actually a new song, so I have to figure out actually who made this song on the fly, so give me a second. This is bad podcasting. I should have been prepared. It is the song... let me restart this. The music you heard in this show is the song Don't Ever Forget, I Don't Want to Say Goodbye. It is a remix of that song by Mecca Imperfect. You can find their music on Bandcamp and YouTube, and there will be a link in the show notes. All right, that is our episode this week. We'll be back next week with another one. Thank you for listening, and until next time, bye.
Bye.